Tell me in the comments what city, what country you're listening from. I read every single one. Some elements of this story are fictional, shaped to carry a message worth hearing. Names and settings are coincidental, but what this story leaves behind in you is not. At my daughter's engagement dinner, I watched my son-in-law to be pour his wine glass over my head in front of 40 guests and laugh. "That's for the wedding gift you never gave us, old man." My own daughter didn't move. She just watched, her jaw tight, her eyes somewhere else entirely. Then she pressed an envelope into my hand and said, "Sign it tonight, Dad. It's easier for everyone." I hadn't even opened it when the restaurant's front doors opened, and a man none of them recognized walked in, and the whole room went quiet enough to hear the candles burn. I've lived 71 years now, and if there's one thing those years taught me, it's that a man learns to hear what isn't being said long before he learns to trust what is. When my daughter called me that Sunday afternoon, something in the gaps between her words told me everything I needed to know. I chose not to listen anyway. That's the part I still carry. My name is Frank Doyle. I spent 34 years running Doyle and Sons Millwork out of a rented garage in Scranton, Pennsylvania, before it became a real operation. 31 employees, 3 delivery trucks, cabinets, and custom staircases in half the new builds within 60 miles. I sold the business 2 years ago, not because my hands had stopped working, but because my wife Louise asked me to slow down before it was too late to enjoy anything. 14 months later, cancer took her anyway. Fast. The kind of fast that doesn't give you time to prepare, only time to watch. That was 19 months ago. Since then, I've lived alone in the house on Maple Ridge Road, the one Louise and I bought when our daughter Diane was 6 years old, back when the mortgage terrified us both, and the backyard was nothing but dirt and a swing set I built from scrap lumber. I still keep her rose bushes alive along the fence line, even though I don't know the names of half the varieties. I still make 2 cups of coffee out of habit most mornings before I remember there's only one of me now. That Sunday, I was on the back porch, working with my hands the way I always have this time on a small wooden jewelry box, cherry wood, dovetail joints, the kind of thing Louise used to admire in the antique shops downtown. It was meant to be a wedding gift for Diane. I'd been working on it for 3 months, sanding it smooth in the evenings when the quiet of the house got too loud. My phone rang, Diane's name on the screen, Dad. Her voice had that particular brightness people use when they're steering a conversation towards something they don't want to say directly. "Are you free? Thursday? We're doing dinner at Antonelli's engagement dinner. Just close family and a few friends of Marcus's from the firm." "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't miss it." "Good. That's good." A pause, half a second too long. "Dad, there's something Marcus wants to talk to you about that night. Business related. Just keep an open mind, okay?" I should have asked what business. I should have pushed. Instead, I said, "Sure, sweetheart," the way I'd said sure to 100 things over the years, rather than risk friction with the one child I had left in the world. Marcus Bellwether had come into Diane's life 18 months earlier, introduced by a mutual friend at some fundraiser I hadn't attended. He worked in commercial real estate development, drove a car that cost more than my first house, and had a way of shaking your hand that made you feel like he was doing you a favor by touching you at all. Diane lit up around him in a way I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. Falling for the wrong boys, except Marcus wasn't the wrong boy in any way I could point to on paper. Steady income, good family, or so he said. Polite to servers, mostly, except when he thought no one was watching. I noticed things. I'd built a business by noticing things: which supplier was quietly cutting corners, which employee was about to quit before they knew it themselves. I noticed that Marcus asked, more than once, in the casual way people ask about what my house on Maple Ridge was worth these days, whether I'd ever thought about the property being rezoned commercial, how strange it was that a man alone needed 3 bedrooms. I noticed that he never asked about Louise, not once, not even to say he was sorry I'd lost her. I told myself I was being an overprotective old man. Diane was 34, sharp, a marketing director at a firm downtown. She didn't need her father vetting her fiancé like she was 16 again. I stayed quiet. That was my choice, and I want to be honest about that before I tell you the rest, because too many people in stories like this pretend they saw nothing coming. I saw plenty coming. I just didn't want to be the man who ruined his daughter's happiness by saying so out loud. Thursday arrived cold and clear, One of those late October evenings in Pennsylvania where the light goes gold too early and everything smells like wood smoke. I put on my good gray suit, the one I'd worn to Louise's funeral and hadn't worn since, and I drove my 2011 Ford pickup, the same one I'd used to haul lumber for 3 decades to Antonelli's, the kind of restaurant with white tablecloths and a maitre d' who calls you sir without meaning it. I found the private room in the back, round tables, maybe 40 people, low lighting, the murmur of expensive small talk. Diane spotted me first and crossed the room quickly, kissing my cheek, her smile just slightly too wide, the smile of someone checking a box. "You look nice, Dad." "Only suit I own," I said, and she laughed the way she used to when she was small, and for one moment I let myself believe the evening would be ordinary. Marcus's mother, Vivian, found me before I'd even reached my seat. Silver hair pulled back severely, a necklace that could have paid off my mortgage twice over, and eyes that moved over my suit, my shoes, my whole self, with the particular efficiency of a woman doing an appraisal. "Frank," she said, extending 2 fingers rather than a full hand. "So glad you could make it. We were beginning to wonder." "Wouldn't miss my daughter's engagement," I said. "Of course not." Her eyes flicked once more over my jacket. "Some people prioritize family differently than others, don't they? We all make our choices about how we show up." She let that sit a second longer than necessary before her smile snapped back on. "Shall we find our seats?" I sat where I was told, near the middle of the room, between an elderly man named Gerald, who'd once done business with Marcus's father, and a woman I never caught the name of, who spent the whole meal on her phone. Diane sat at the head table with Marcus, radiant in a green dress Louise would have loved, and I watched my daughter perform happiness the way you watch someone hold a smile too long for a photograph technically correct, but something underneath it working too hard. Dinner arrived. Wine was poured. Toasts were made, mostly by Marcus's side of the family, elaborate stories about his childhood, his ambition, his vision. Nobody asked me to say anything about Diane, though I'd have had plenty to say about the girl who used to fall asleep in my truck listening to the radio, about the young woman who called me crying after her first heartbreak and let me sit with her in silence, because that's what she needed, not advice. Nobody asked. I told myself it didn't matter. It was somewhere around the second course that Vivian raised her glass again, this time looking directly at me. "To family," she said, "and to knowing when to be generous with the people you love. Some of us understand that better than others." Her eyes didn't leave mine. "We do hope, Frank, that tonight you'll show Diane the kind of support a father should." I felt my jaw tighten the way it does when I'm working hard not to say something I'll regret. "I've always supported my daughter," I said, keeping my voice even. "Every day of her life." "Have you?" Vivian tilted her head, the smile never wavering. "Funny, Marcus mentioned you never even offered to help with the down payment on the house they're looking at. 34 years running a business and nothing set aside for your only child's future. Some people call that thrift. I call it something else." The table had gone quiet around us, the particular quiet of people pretending not to listen while listening very closely. I looked at my daughter. Diane was staring at her plate. And I understood then, the way you understand a held breath, that this had been planned. That whatever "keep an open mind" meant, this was the beginning of it. "Diane," I said quietly, "what's going on?" Marcus answered before she could. He set down his fork with a small, deliberate click against the china. "Frank, we didn't want to spring this on you, but since Mom's opened the door, Diane and I have been talking. We're closing on a property next month, a really incredible opportunity, and we're a little short on the down payment. We were hoping, given that you sold the business and everything, that you might consider helping us out. Family should help family." "How much?" I said. It wasn't really a question. $240,000, Marcus said, like he was asking for a ride to the airport. I sat with that number for a moment, feeling the whole table's attention pressing against me, like heat off a stove. "That's a significant amount," I said carefully. "I'd want to understand the investment, see the numbers. That's not me saying no, Marcus. That's me being responsible with money I spent 3 decades earning." Vivian made a small sound, something between a laugh and a scoff. "Responsible. That's one word for it." She looked around the table as if inviting witnesses. "Some people just don't understand what it means to be generous with family. We all make different choices about how we love the people around us, don't we?" The word landed exactly where she intended it, not on the money, but on Louise's memory, on 31 years of loading lumber before dawn, on every sacrifice nobody at that table had ever seen. I felt something old and tired rise up in my chest, the particular exhaustion of being underestimated by people who had never once been tested the way I had. I built a business from a rented garage, I said, and I kept my voice level, though it cost me something to do it. I put my daughter through college without a single loan. I buried my wife 18 months ago, and I still get up every morning and water her roses because I promised her I would. Generosity isn't the same thing as being handed a blank check the same night I'm asked for one. For half a second, something flickered across Vivian's face, the annoyance of a woman whose script had gone slightly off course. Then the smile came back, thinner now. "Of course," she said. "Shall we move to dessert?" The conversation restarted around the table like an engine turning over, but something had shifted in the room, a temperature drop I could feel in my shoulders. I looked at Diane. She still hadn't looked up from her plate. Dessert came and went. Coffee was poured. And then Marcus stood, tapped his glass with a spoon, calling the room to attention for what I assumed would be another toast. "Before we wrap up tonight," he said, "there's actually one more piece of business." He nodded toward Diane, who reached into her purse with hands that weren't quite steady and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. She walked it around the table to me, not meeting my eyes, and set it in front of my plate. "What is this?" I said. "Just paperwork," Diane said. Her voice had gone thin. "For the property. It's a co-signing agreement, that's all. Standard stuff. If you sign tonight, we can close by the 15th. I looked down at the envelope, sealed, my name written on the front, in a stranger's handwriting, not Diane's. I had built and sold a company. I had read enough contracts in 34 years to know that no honest document arrives sealed at a dinner table with an audience of 40 people watching you decide whether to open it. "I'll need my attorney to look at this first," I said. "That's not negotiable. Not tonight, not under these circumstances." Marcus's easy smile finally cracked, just slightly, just enough. "Frank, we don't really have time for lawyers. The seller wants this closed fast. We were hoping you'd trust your own daughter enough to just—" "It's not about trust in Diane," I said, and I meant it, though even as I said it I could feel Diane flinch beside me like the words had landed somewhere raw. "It's about never signing anything I haven't read twice and understood completely. That's not a policy I'm willing to break for anyone, including people I love." Vivian's laugh this time had no warmth in it at all. Unbelievable. 31 years running a business, and you still think everyone's trying to cheat you. No wonder Diane grew up feeling like she had to earn your affection, instead of just having it. The words hit somewhere under my ribs, sharp and precise. The kind of thing you only say when you've studied exactly where a person is soft. I looked at my daughter, waiting for her to say something, anything, in my defense, or at least to look uncomfortable at what had just been said about her own childhood in front of 40 strangers. She didn't. She was staring at the envelope, her hands pressed flat against the white tablecloth the way mine had been a moment earlier, except where I had done it to steady myself. I understood suddenly that she was doing it to hold herself together against something rising from underneath. Then Marcus, standing still with his wine glass in hand, looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him before, something colder, something that had been waiting under the polish the whole evening. "You know what?" he said. "Maybe you just don't understand what family costs anymore, old man." And he tipped the glass, slow and deliberate, letting the wine run down over my hair, my collar, the good gray suit I'd worn to my wife's funeral. A few gasps went up around the table. Someone's chair scraped back. "That's for the wedding gift you never even offered," he said, and he almost laughed doing it. "Consider us even." I sat there with wine soaking into the wool, the sting of it barely registering under the larger sting of watching my daughter's face do absolutely nothing to defend me. 40 people. 40 people watched a grown man pour wine over a 71-year-old widower's head at his own daughter's engagement dinner, and not one of them said a word. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had loaded delivery trucks before sunrise for 3 decades, that had held Louise's face on our wedding day, that had sanded a cherrywood jewelry box smooth every night for 3 months, because I wanted my daughter to have something I made with my own hands on the happiest day of her life. "Diane," I said quietly, and my voice came out rougher than I wanted it to. "Sign it tonight, Dad," she said instead, not looking at me, pushing the envelope another inch closer. "It's easier for everyone. Please, just do this one thing." I understood, in that moment, precisely what she had chosen, and precisely what it had cost her to choose it, and both of those things broke something in me at the exact same time. I picked up the envelope. My hand was steadier than I expected. When life has hit you hard enough times, your body learns to absorb the first blow before your mind catches up to the second one. I turned it over once, feeling its weight, and I was about to say something I still don't know exactly what, when the double doors at the far end of the private room opened. A man walked in, tall, gray at the temples, unhurried in the particular way of someone who has never once in his life needed to rush for anyone. He wore a navy overcoat, still buttoned, and he stood in the doorway for a moment, simply taking in the room, the wine on my collar, the envelope in my hand. 40 frozen faces turned toward him. "Frank Doyle," he said, and his voice carried easily across the whole room without him raising it at all. "I got your message. I came straight from the airport." Nobody at that table knew who he was. I barely believed it myself for a full 3 seconds before recognition landed. Tom Alvarez. 26 years earlier, Tom had been 18 years old, sleeping some nights in his car outside a Sunoco station 2 blocks from my shop, when I caught him trying to break into our supply shed for copper wire he could sell for scrap. Instead of calling the police, I'd offered him a broom and $8 an hour. 4 years later, he was running my loading dock. 11 years after that, he left to start his own company, commercial construction, mostly warehouses and logistics centers, and I'd co-signed his very first business loan with money Louise and I had set aside for our own retirement, because I looked at that 18-year-old kid and saw something worth betting on. Tom Alvarez was, as of 18 months ago, according to a magazine profile Louise had clipped and kept on the refrigerator until the day she died, worth an estimated $420 million. He crossed the room now, ignoring every single person he passed, and stopped beside my chair. He looked down at the wine on my jacket, at my hand still gripping the unopened envelope, and something in his face went very still and very quiet. "Who did this?" he said, not loud, quieter than anything else said in that room all night, and somehow that made it worse for everyone listening. "Tom," I said, "you don't need to." "Who did this, Frank?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Marcus was still standing, wine glass in hand, his face draining of whatever confidence had been holding it up all evening. Tom reached across the table and picked up a linen napkin, folded it once, and crouched down beside my chair, exactly the way I remembered crouching down beside him 26 years earlier when he'd shown up to his second week of work with a black eye he wouldn't explain, and I'd handed him ice wrapped in a shop rag without asking a single question. "Tom, you really don't have to." "Let me do this," he said, quiet enough that it was meant only for me, and he began blotting the wine from my collar with the same careful, methodical patience I remembered from a young man learning to sand a table edge for the first time. The room had gone so silent I could hear the flames on the centerpiece candles. Vivian recovered first, her voice cutting across the stillness like something mechanical. "This is all very touching, but I don't see what ancient history has to do with tonight's business." Tom straightened slowly and turned to face her for the first time, and something in his expression shifted the warmth that had been there for me, draining into something precise and entirely without sentiment. "It has everything to do with tonight, Mrs. Bellwether." He reached into his coat and pulled out his phone, looked at it once, then looked back at her. "Would you like to explain to this room what you and your son discussed with Diane's fiancé's business partner 3 weeks ago? Or should I?" The color left Vivian's face in a way that told me, more than any confession could have, that she already knew exactly what he meant. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but the precision had gone out of her voice. "I think you do," Tom said. "I own the parcel Marcus told you all he was closing on next month. The one he needs your father's $240,000 to secure. There is no closing on the 15th. Because there's no seller willing to sell to a man who's already defaulted on 2 commercial loans this year and is 3 payments behind on a car lease. Marcus doesn't need Frank's money for a down payment." He paused, letting that settle over the room like frost. "He needs it to cover a debt to people considerably less patient than a bank." The silence that followed had weight to it. I watched my daughter's face go through something I can only describe as a structure collapsing, floor-by-floor confusion, then disbelief, then a terrible dawning clarity as she looked at Marcus and saw, for what might have been the first time, exactly what she'd agreed to marry. "That's not Tom. That's not what this is," Marcus started, but his voice had lost all its earlier polish, gone thin and fast. "I have the paperwork," Tom said simply. "I have the recorded call where you told your business partner, and I quote, that the old man will fold once he sees his daughter's face. He always does." He looked at me then, and something in his expression softened even as his jaw stayed tight. "I got that recording from the partner himself, Frank. He didn't like what he was being asked to help cover up. Some people still have a line they won't cross, even in a business like his." Diane made a sound I'd never heard her make before. Something caught between a gasp and a sob, and she looked at Marcus with an expression that told me the engagement, whatever it had been built on, was already finished, even before anyone said the words. "You used me," she said, very quietly, and then louder. "You used my father's love for me as leverage. You knew I'd hand him that envelope. You knew I'd beg him." "Diane, please, let me explain." "Don't." Her voice cracked down the middle. "Don't you dare." Vivian tried, briefly, to salvage something, turned to the room with her chin lifted, opened her mouth to offer some version of context or blame. But two of her own relatives were already standing, already reaching for coats, and the particular silence of people who have witnessed something they cannot endorse spread through the room like water finding its level. Within 10 minutes, more than half the guests had quietly left, murmuring apologies to no one in particular, the sound of chairs scraping back and jackets being retrieved, filling the space where celebration should have been. I sat very still through most of it, the envelope still unopened in my lap, wine drying stiff in the fabric of my suit, and I felt something in my chest that wasn't triumph. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect triumph in stories like this, and it isn't always what shows up. What I felt was grief. Grief for the daughter who had been so afraid of losing something that she'd nearly let a stranger's cruelty pour over her own father's head without a word in his defense. Grief for whatever version of Diane had believed this man loved her. Diane came and knelt beside my chair the way Tom had a few minutes before, and she took my hand, the one still holding the unopened envelope, and she cried into my shoulder the way she used to cry as a little girl after a nightmare, and I let her, because that's what a father does, even when his suit is ruined and his pride is bruised, and 40 people have just watched the worst night of his year unfold in real time. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have said something. I should have stopped it. I don't know why I—" "You were scared," I said. "Scared people do things they're not proud of. I know that better than almost anyone. I let him pour wine on you." "You did," I said, "because I wasn't going to lie to her about that, not that night. But you're here now. That matters more than you think." Tom drove us both home that night, Diane in the back seat of his car, me in front, still smelling like a wine cellar, and somewhere on the highway between Scranton and Maple Ridge Road, I finally said the thing I should have said to my daughter years earlier, long before any of this. "I'm not going to keep protecting you from every hard thing anymore, Diane. I did that too long already. With money, with silence, with letting things slide because I didn't want to be the father who made you cry. That's not love. That's fear wearing love's clothes. Real love tells the truth, even when it costs something." She was quiet a long moment, watching the streetlights slide past the window. "I know," she finally said. "I think I've known for a while." The engagement ended within the week, formally, on paper, though it had really ended the moment Vivian's mask slipped in that private room. Diane moved back into her old apartment, took a leave of absence from work, and came to Maple Ridge Road most Sundays for dinner, something we hadn't done regularly since before Louise died. I finished the cherrywood jewelry box that winter and gave it to her not as a wedding gift, but simply because I'd made it with my hands and wanted her to have it. She keeps it on her dresser now, she tells me, with the little things that matter, Louise's wedding ring, a photograph of the three of us from a Christmas 20 years back, a pressed rose from the bushes along our fence line. Tom and I still talk most weeks. He never did explain how he happened to be in town that particular night, at that particular hour, and I've never asked. Some debts you don't examine too closely, you just carry the gratitude and let it be enough. What I know is that 26 years ago I gave a broke, frightened 18-year-old a broom and a chance nobody else was offering him, expecting nothing back. And somehow, on the one night in my life, I needed someone to walk through a door and remind a room full of strangers what a person is actually worth. That's exactly what happened. I think about that a great deal these days, working in the garden Louise loved, watering roses whose names I'm slowly learning one at a time. I think about the difference between the kind of love that keeps writing checks to keep the peace and the kind that finally says, no, not like this, not at the cost of your own dignity. I spent a long time confusing the two. I don't anymore. Diane started seeing someone new this spring, a quiet man named Peter who teaches high school science and drives a car 12 years old. And the first time he came to Sunday dinner, he helped me clear the table without being asked, and admired the dovetail joints on an old cabinet in the hallway without knowing I'd built it. I haven't said much to Diane about him. I don't need to. Some things a father simply knows the shape of, the way you know good joinery just by running your hand along the seam. Last month, I hosted the first Doyle Foundation dinner in the old millwork shop, now cleaned out and repurposed 30 scholarship students from the community college, kids working with their hands the way I once did, learning trades nobody in their families had ever had the chance to learn. Tom showed up unannounced, in jeans instead of a suit, and helped serve coffee out of a percolator that had seen better decades. Diane came too, sleeves rolled up, laughing at something one of the students said, more herself than I'd seen her in over a year. "How many tonight?" Tom asked me, looking around the room the way a man looks at something he's proud to have had a small hand in. 41, I said. Might hit 50 by next year. Good, he said, and there was nothing else in that word but truth. This is good, Frank. By the end of the evening, the shop was warm and loud, in the way rooms get when the people in them are genuinely glad to be there, not performing gladness for an audience, not calculating what the room might cost them. I stood near the door for a while, just watching it, my daughter, my old friend, 30-40 strangers building something with their hands the way I'd spent my whole life doing, and I thought, not for the first time, that Louise would have loved this room most of all. She always said the best tables were the ones with mismatched chairs.